Welcome back to the channel, everyone. Today we will be looking into another shocking true crime case. In this case, we look into how Katherine Knight slaughtered her boyfriend and made him into a grisly sort of stew. A stew she intended for his children to eat. Slaughterhouse worker Katherine Knight became the first woman in Australia to receive a life sentence without parole after she decapitated and cooked John Thomas Price. Not only had this Australian abattoir worker stabbed her lover with a butcher knife at least 37 times in February 2000, she then chopped him up, cooked him, and prepared to serve him to his own children. Born on October 24th, 1955 in Tenterfield, Australia, Katherine Mary Knight was the product of a scandalous affair between her mother Barbara Ruffin and her father Ken Knight. Ruffin was not only already a mother of 4 boys with another man, but she even met Ken Knight through her husband. When their secret rendezvous came to light, it rocked their small conservative town. Knight's chaotic childhood didn't get much better from there. Her father was a violent alcoholic who raped her mother multiple times a day. Knight herself claims that she was sexually assaulted by several family members until the age of 11 in school. Knight was known as a bully who terrorized smaller children without ever learning how to read or write. She quit at the age of 15 to work at a clothing factory. A year later, she landed her dream job at a slaughterhouse, cutting out the internal organs of animals. Journalist Peter Lawler wrote in Bloodstain, his true crime book that covered Katherine Knight, that she loved her job so much that she hung her first set of butcher's knives over her bed just in case she ever wanted to use them. And eventually she did. While working in the butcher shop, Knight met David Kellen, a raging alcoholic, much like her father, who was prone to fistfights and was used to heightened levels of violence. Knight surprised her new beau when she joined in on one of his drunken scuffles. In 1974, she convinced him to marry her. He was heavily intoxicated the entire time, and her mother even warned him about her daughter's temper, saying that Knight had a screw loose somewhere. On their wedding night, Katherine and Kellett consummated their marriage 3 times. When Kellett fell asleep, Knight wanted a 4th round and took issue with her new husband's exhaustion, so she started to strangle him. Kellett woke up and managed to fight her off. Even though she attempted to kill him only 1 day into their marriage, the union lasted for 10 more years. After discovering one of Kellett's affairs, Knight placed their 2-month-old on the local train tracks shortly before a train was due. The train didn't come, and the infant was spared. The same day, Katherine also threatened several people with an axe she had stolen. She had been diagnosed with postnatal depression. Some weeks after this, witnesses reported seeing Katherine Knight violently pushing and swinging her 2nd child in a stroller down a busy street. Katherine then spent a few months in a psychiatric hospital where she told nurses that she intended to kill a mechanic who had fixed Kellett's car because that made it possible for him to leave her. Despite this threat, Kellett took Katherine back when she was released from the hospital. Their reunion didn't last long, and Katherine went through a period of deep melancholy. After Kellett finally did leave her, Katherine Knight began a string of toxic relationships. In 1986, shortly after her breakup with Kellett, she jumped into a whirlwind romance with David Saunders, a local miner. Within a few months, Saunders moved in with Katherine and her 2 daughters. However, he kept his apartment, and she became incredibly jealous and suspicious about what he did when she wasn't around. Like her previous relationships, this one quickly grew toxic and violent. At one point, she slit the throat of his 2-month-old dingo puppy in front of him just to show him what she was capable of. Still, they stayed together and even had a daughter a year later. They stayed together for 3 years and also had a son, Eric Knight. While no violent incidents have been reported about their relationship, it ended after it was learned that Katherine was having an affair with a man named John Price. Now, let's look at Katherine Knight's violent relationship with John Price. The beginning of Katherine Knight and John Price's relationship was without complication, and things were going smoothly. However, when Katherine suggested they marry and Price declined, she turned violent. Katherine even framed Price for stealing things from his company and got him fired. Though he initially kicked her out, a few months later, they started seeing each other again. However, this time, he refused to let her move back in, according to their friends and neighbors. Knight's violence then began to escalate. In February of 2000, an argument between John and Katherine culminated with her attempting to stab Price in the chest. He took out a restraining order against Knight in an attempt to keep his children safe. Toward the end of the month, Price led on that he was concerned for his safety and told his co-workers that if he ever went missing, it was because Katherine Knight had killed him. He was right to be afraid. On February 29, 2000, John Price came home from work. He followed his usual routine of visiting with his neighbors. Before going to bed at 11, Katherine arrived home shortly after, made herself dinner, watched TV, showered, and then went upstairs. The two had sex, and Price went back to bed. Sometime later, after he had fallen asleep, Katherine Knight took a butcher knife from next to her bed, where she had always kept them, and stabbed Price 37 times. According to evidence, he woke up during the attack but could not fight her off. Price eventually succumbed to his injuries. Knight dragged his body downstairs, skinned him, and hung his body from a meat hook in the living room. Then she decapitated him and cut up pieces of his body to cook in a dish with potato, pumpkin, beets, cabbage, squash, and gravy. She then made a dish for herself, though half-discarded contents later found at the crime scene suggest that she couldn't finish her meal. She then laid down next to the headless, mutilated body of Price, took a large number of pills, and passed out. Price's co-workers heeded his warning the next morning and called the police after he didn't show up for his shift. The police arrived to find Katherine Knight's gruesome crime scene and immediately detained the comatose woman. Once she woke up, she claimed to have no memory of the night before. In the kitchen, police found Price's head boiling in the gruesome pot of stew on his stove. On the table, the police found 2 full plates, each labeled with a name. That's when the police realized, to their unspeakable horror, that Knight had planned to serve John Price's body parts to his children. Katherine Knight will never be released. Her trial commenced, but it didn't get very far. For reasons that remain unclear, Knight changed her plea to guilty, and the judge adjourned the case without testimony. She was escorted to prison that day, and the judge ordered that her papers be marked never to be released. For the first time in history, a woman in Australia was given a life sentence without parole. To this day, Katherine Knight, nevertheless, maintains her innocence and refuses to accept responsibility for her actions. She's still serving her life sentence at the Silverwater Women's Correctional Centre in New South Wales. Thank you for watching. Make sure to subscribe for more odd and depraved psychological cases like this one.